Are you following advice that's stopping you from losing fat or building muscle? Maybe you've heard that you can't do both of them at the same time. And for 95% of people, that is true. But only because most people get these 5 things wrong. So in this video, I'm going to show you how to lose fat and build muscle at the same time, even while working crazy shifts. Because that's what I was able to do in 2021 as we came out of the lockdown, when bars reopened, restaurants reopened, and I was working absolutely silly shifts with no breaks and nowhere near enough staff. But I still managed to pull off a pretty solid transformation in just 10 weeks. So stick around if you want to know how to do the same thing. Just quickly before we get into it, I want to explain the concept of what we're actually trying to do here. Think of your body like a restaurant kitchen that you're renovating. You start by clearing out the old clutter and the broken equipment, which is the losing fat part. But at the same time, you're installing some shiny new rational ovens and some sick new equipment, which is the building muscle part. You're not trying to do a total demolition and rebuild everything from scratch. You're upgrading while you operate. So it can be a little bit slower than just doing one or the other, and the initial results might not be as obvious because the kitchen's going to be a bit of a mess for the first few weeks as you're getting rid of the old stuff. But once it starts all coming together, that's when you're really going to see a big, big difference. And the end result is going to be a kitchen that looks and works a whole lot better. And it's exactly the same with your physique. So let me show you how this works in real life. This is Stephen. He's a chef who's been active for a good few years, playing football, climbing, even working out in his home gym. So on paper, it sounds like he should be in absolutely great shape, except he wasn't. But his weeks always looked the same. 4 really long shifts from Wednesday to Saturday, and then cramming all his workouts in from Sunday to Tuesday, which just left him exhausted, pretty sore, and just constantly frustrated that he wasn't really getting anywhere with his progress. By the end of the week, he'd be feeling guilty for falling off again, and then every Monday was like starting completely from scratch. So his goal had always been to lose the stubborn fat around his midsection. He wanted to build some definition in his chest and arms and just get overall stronger for his climbing as well. But after being stuck for about 2 years with nothing really to show for it, he was asking himself if he was even doing anything right at all. So if any of that sounds at all familiar, you're going to want to stick around. So let's take Stephen's situation and actually run it through this system, and I'll explain how everything works. The first thing we had to do, just like in a kitchen that isn't flowing, was look at the layout. Where are the bottlenecks and where's the wasted space? So that's step 1, which is to diagnose the problems. So when we had a proper look at Stephen's week, it was pretty obvious where the misalignment was. His week was split between doing long shifts on one side and then cramming all his workouts in on the other side of it. Not really an ideal way of doing things. But when I dug a bit deeper into how he actually felt because of that, Wednesday mornings, he'd be exhausted from training 3 days in a row. By Saturday, he'd be running on fumes with his food choices just out the window, grabbing whatever's convenient, trying to survive. And Sunday, he'd be back in the gym, feeling like he'd reset to square one. If your week is designed against you, your plan is always going to crash with your rower. It's like trying to do evening service in a kitchen with no space. You've got pots piled up on each other, food spilling everywhere, and just nothing runs smoothly at all. So this was the fix for Stephen. We drew out his week and found his real training windows. An hour on Sunday afternoon, an hour on Tuesday morning, and 45 minutes on Thursday evening. More spread out, more manageable, and actually protected around his shifts. Because without that foundation, none of this would have worked. So once we had this layout fixed, the next problem was what Stephen was actually doing inside those sessions. The workouts he was doing were pretty messy and they were pretty inconsistent. So that's where step 2 came in, which is where we designed the workouts effectively. So like I said, his old workouts were all over the place. Sometimes they were an hour, sometimes 2.5. No real progression plan either. So we stripped it back to a simple, repeatable formula. Every session had a 5-minute warm-up into 3 or 4 compound lifts, and then into 2 or 3 accessory movements with an optional 5-minute finisher. That's it. We tailored the exercises around climbing and football, and obviously the equipment that he had in his home gym. So it was lots of pulling patterns for grip strength, single leg work for his football, and progressive overload that he could easily keep track of. So it looked a little bit like this on screen. And for the first week, it was all just about getting used to the movements, figuring out his baseline numbers of what weights he was going to be using. And then from there, we started gradually increasing the intensity and working closer and closer to failure over the next few weeks, to the point where he was training to full failure. Just kept it super simple, removed all the guesswork of what weights he should be using so that he could just keep track of his progress very easily. So this is where you're standardizing your stations and your kit. So you're using the same tools in the same order every single service, because that's how you get faster and better without chaos. But then even with his session sorted, a kitchen can't run if the stockroom is still a mess. And that's when most chefs fall down, Steve included. He didn't want to have to overthink his food after 12-hour shift. So step 3 was about stocking the kitchen effectively with simple minimum effort nutrition. So Stephen told me in week 1 that he didn't want to go balls deep on nutrition. He didn't really want to have to think about cooking after doing that all day at work. He just wanted something super simple that actually works. So here's the basic formula for a body recomp. You need progressive overload with your workouts, plenty of protein for muscle recovery and growth, and you want to eat around about maintenance calories so that your body weight doesn't go up too much or down too much. So with Stephen, we had a quick run through of the kind of meals that he was already eating, and then we just optimized them a little bit so they were more tailored to his goals. More protein and a bit more fruit and veg. Just simple rules that he could apply to any meal. And the result was that he had enough fuel to build muscle on his training days, and the activity from his climbing, football, and long shifts was enough to help burn enough calories for him to lose fat. So this bit is like reorganizing your stockroom. You're not starving the kitchen of the ingredients that it needs, you're just controlling the flow of it. Enough food to run service smoothly, but no waste piling up. But now, even with the layout, the sessions, and the stock sorted, Stephen still wouldn't have made progress if the kitchen overheated mid-service. So that's where recovery comes into the equation. Step 4 is all about installing the boring but essential safety systems that keep progress sustainable. Just 4 weeks into the program, Stephen was already feeling the benefits. He was sleeping better, his midweek sessions felt strong, and he was progressing pretty nicely with most of his movements. But what changed to allow that to happen? His recovery. We'd set up 3 simple guardrails to make sure that he was always able to recover enough between his sessions. He had a sleep minimum, so getting at least 7 hours of sleep every single night, even after late shifts. Hydration, aiming for about 2.5 litres of water every single day, and an alcohol cap, having 2 drinks max on the weekends, because sometimes he'd have a couple more to decompress. So the magic wasn't in the rules themselves, it was the fact that Stephen finally had an actual framework that he could follow. Instead of winging it and feeling guilty, he had clear boundaries that actually worked with his lifestyle and that weren't a chore for him to keep up with. So yeah, this is the boring stuff. In the kitchen, it's your ventilation, your electrics, your health and safety checks. But if these aren't right, the whole kitchen is going to overheat and it's going to break down. Same with your fitness. If your recovery is not right, your body is going to pump the brakes one way or another, whether it's you burning out or getting an injury. So we've got everything in place now, but no kitchen and no training plan runs perfectly smoothly forever. You need a snagging list, and that's where step 5 comes in, where we review, adjust, and repeat. So yeah, step 1 to 4 was the setup. But if I just left it at that for Stephen, he probably wouldn't have got the same results. Because a key part of the process that most people forget about is reviewing and making adjustments. So every 2 weeks throughout the process, we'd review one thing. What's been the biggest win? Sometimes it was nailing his protein target. Sometimes it was squeezing in an extra session. Sometimes it was just not feeling guilty about food. And then we'd pick one small adjustment to focus on, tightening up some of his meals, pushing the intensity of some of his workouts, sometimes pulling back to allow for a bit more recovery. But those small tweaks led to big results over time. And because Stephen stuck to that review process, not just the setup, his results started to snowball. And here's what happened after 12 weeks. What's interesting about Stephen's results is the fact that his body weight barely changed throughout the whole process. He went from 79 kilos to 77.5. But in his photos, he's a completely different person. So much leaner through his midsection. The love handles are gone. He's got more muscle all over, but particularly his triceps, shoulders, and back. He's stronger, climbing better, and he's fitter on the pitch. But here's the real win. He broke the guilt cycle that he was stuck in. Training wasn't crammed in, inconsistent, or exhausting anymore. It's now enjoyable, sustainable, and continuing to moving forward. And he doesn't just feel the benefits in how he looks, but also in his energy, how he shows up at work, and just the daily sense that he's winning. So if you don't know where to start with this, you can use some of Stephen's shortcuts. The first being the 2+1 training formula, where you aim for 2 full body strength workouts a week, ticking off your compound lifts, plus 1 micro session, which is about 20-30 minutes long, where you do some cardio, you get some accessory movements in, or focus on another area that you want to focus on. That's literally it. You just protect those 3 slots like your life depends on it and show up and do the work. The second shortcut is the protein anchor method. This is where you take 4 meals that are already in your roster and you just make them high protein. Or I'm giving you some ideas right here that you can steal. And the last shortcut is the 3P rule. So every week before your first shift, you want to plan out your training days around your rota. You then pivot when your rota changes and just slot them in wherever they're going to fit. And from that, you focus on the progress. If you do 2 sessions instead of 3, just count it as a win and move on. They're your 3 Ps. Now here's the part that most chefs don't like to admit. Surprisingly, or actually unsurprisingly, chefs are usually terrible with their own nutrition. You're already cooking all day, and the last thing you want to do when you get home is cook for yourself. And you don't want to spend your creativity coming up with nice high protein meals when you're already using that to design menus and make everything look nice when you're at work. So normally the default is just get whatever's convenient, or grab a ready meal or even a takeaway after your shift. And that was Stephen's problem too. He wanted variety in his meals, but he didn't want the stress of having to plan it all out. And that's actually the same feedback that I get from all my clients. So I just built a system for it. You just answer a few quick questions about your shift patterns, what you struggle with when it comes to nutrition, and your food preferences. And within 20 seconds, it spits out exact recipes that fit around your needs that you can try out. No stress, no overthinking, just meals that work for your routine. And if that sounds like something that you need, you can find out more about it in the description below. So there you go. That's the exact system that I used with Stephen to help him lose fat, build muscle, and finally feel like he was in control again, even with his crazy shift pattern. But don't just stop here. If you want to see how to actually set up your own training plan, where you're not wasting hours and hours in the gym and that actually fits around your shifts, I've got a full breakdown of how to do that in this video. And if you found this one helpful, drop a comment below. Let me know if you want me to go deeper on a particular topic, either on training, nutrition, mindset, whatever it is. I read all the comments. And just hit subscribe if you want to keep seeing more of these videos as well.